Last week I asked if, keeping your current weight, you would rather be twice as tall or half as tall. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask a question for next week. That is, would you rather be very wealthy or very successful in a chosen field? I really like this question because obviously the two aren't mutually exclusive. You can be both wealthy and successful, and in fact, if you are very wealthy, it's easier to become successful in whatever field you'd like, with money not being a problem. And if you're successful, well, there is the old saying, if you love what you do, find a way to profit off of it. So the two kind of can go hand in hand, and it matters just which one you want to do first, or which one you would like to focus on. But of course, the obvious follow-up question for anybody who wants to take it a step further is, which would you choose if the two actually were mutually exclusive, at least to a reasonable degree? And beyond that, would you still choose success if you chose success if the successful field were completely unmarketable? Leave your comments down below, and I might even respond to some of them in next week's video. But on that note, let's approach last week's. Half as tall or twice as tall? Even saying that, I don't think that people really get an idea of the scale that we're talking about. If you round up and say that I'm an even 6 feet tall, then half of that is 3 feet tall. I looked it up, and the average 3-year-old is several inches taller than that. And 12 feet tall is just ridiculously large. Like, if I wanted to get to 12 feet tall, I could put Michael Jordan sitting on Shaquille O'Neal's shoulders, getting a good old piggyback ride, and he'd still have to reach up in order to pat me on the head. If I were 12 feet tall, I would have to slouch in order to rest my chin on the rim of a basketball hoop. So it's ridiculous sizes. And that's just looking at the height issue. When we add in that we're maintaining a constant weight, that adds a whole nother issue of problems. I did say in my original question that there would be no initial health concerns. There wouldn't be an immediate risk that you'll have a heart attack or your body will just cease to work. But when I say that you're going to double height, the amount of weight you should be getting is beyond expectations. Normally, when you double height, you don't just double your weight. It's not just your height that doubles for normal people. All of your other attributes are going to double as well. You're going to be twice as broad, twice as thick. You can look at this very easily because, as I said, a 3-year-old is roughly half of my height. So, if I'm looking at the weight, there's no 3-year-old who is half my weight. That'd be close to a 90-pound 3-year-old. You can look up the tables. 30 to maybe 40 pounds is okay, but little kids are also built differently than adult humans, so there's that to measure. Normally, a good way to think of it is just to multiply in 3 dimensions. I'm doubling my height, I'm doubling my width, I'm doubling my girth, however you want to call that, and so I will be 8 times as heavy for normally doubling height. Another way that we can think about this is, let's keep my height fixed constant and just literally multiply my weight by 8. That's effectively going to have the same result as shrinking me by half. But that's really big. It's actually within the realm of possibility. The heaviest man ever recorded weighed just about 1,400 pounds at his heaviest point. I weigh around 180, sometimes a little bit less. So multiplied by 8, my weight would be within 50 pounds of the heaviest man alive. I'd actually be like 1,440. But he was also several inches taller than I was. So all of these things stacked together If I were 3 feet tall at my current weight, I would be enormous for that height. And meanwhile, if I double my height, you would expect me to be 8 times heavier. So at my current height, if we divide it by 8 to get the same reference point of how skinny I would need to be, you say skin and bones, but that doesn't even really cover it, because when I take just the skeleton of an average person, once again, I looked it up so that you don't have to, and the average skeleton is about 14% of your body weight. 1/8 is 12.5%. So for me to weigh 1/8 of what I do now, you would have to make me literally be just skin and bones, and then, shave off about 10% more from that. It's not easily feasible. You'd at least have to stretch the bones, make them lighter. You'd be like a little twig of taffy that you've stretched to its absolute limit. So that's all just ridiculous. But, I mean, since we're being ridiculous anyway, there is another method. Instead of stretching or squishing me so that my same weight, my same volume stays the same, we could grow me out proportionally, and in order to keep the weight the same, we can just change my density. If I take my current form and I shrink down 180 pounds of me onto a 3-foot frame with all of my other dimensions shrinking accordingly so that I just look like a miniature Rory at the end of the day, we can do that, but I'm going to be really dense. Water and humans both together have fairly similar density. We both have a density around 1 gram per milliliter, 1 gram per cubic centimeter, if you will, assuming that all the air is out of my chest, and then just varying from person to person. Muscle and bone weighs about 1.1 gram per cubic centimeter, and fat weighs about 0.9, so it all just evens out at the end of the day. Meanwhile, if I'm 8 times that, if I weigh roughly 8 grams per cubic centimeter, that's really dense. Like, I actually had to look up and had a fairly hard time finding any common substance which is that dense. For comparison, yeah, I would float on a lake of liquid mercury, but a bag of sand is around 1.6 grams per cubic centimeter, and even if I take a big old chunk of rock, granite is 2.75 grams per cubic centimeter. That's right, this little dense Rory at 3 feet is going to be almost 3 times more dense than solid rock. I'm going to be surprisingly difficult to move for my size. And beyond that, if I am going to go into it, we can also look at the big scale, of course. Now, thankfully, even at 8 times my current volume, at my current weight, I'm not going to float off like some helium balloon. Air is roughly 1,000 times lighter than water, so I won't even really notice that difference standing around. But if I do get into water, I'm going to start floating somewhere around my knees, and beyond that, swimming, I'll just be on the surface like some kind of speedboat. And we get into how muscles work. Normal human muscles, or dog muscles, whatever muscles you're looking at, have strength based on their cross-sectional area, give or take. Subject for another video. But we're looking at magic super light muscles. So is my strength the same as it is in my current form? Because in that case, being taller is actually a disadvantage, because although my total strength is the same, because all of my limbs and body are going to be longer, anytime I lift my arm out, move away from my center of gravity, I'm going to have this thing that the lever arm is twice as long. Having that lever arm twice as long means that the torque is going to be twice as big, which means that effectively my ability to lift things, at least to lift things away from my center of mass is going to be half as strong. Meanwhile, if I'm my current strength in a tiny body, just the opposite is true. I'm going to feel like I'm twice as strong because the amount of leverage I'm able to exert, I'll just have a shorter lever arm. When I'm holding something out at maximum distance from my body, that something is actually very close, and so it'll be much easier to hold that weight up. But if I'm looking at it and it is related to the cross section of my muscles, bigger is better, obviously. And so if I have my double-sized massive Rory with 4 times as large of a cross-sectional area of muscle, that weight to strength ratio is just ridiculous. Even that pure strength is just ridiculous. The amount that I can lift, if I'm literally 4 times as strong as I am right now, immediately puts me on the same scale as the very best Olympic bodybuilders in the world. So that's all that. Of course, if I'm stretched out like taffy and looking at the cross-sectional area of my muscles, it's basically going to be 0, and that body's going to snap like a stick. And regardless, if I have so little weight compared to my surface area, I'm going to be just knocked around by a stiff breeze. So if you ask me if at my current weight I would rather be twice as tall or half as tall, that's a really difficult question with a lot of variables that I just don't know. If I do know all of the variables, it becomes easier. There's almost always going to be one scenario or another that I find more favorable. But if I don't know the exact mechanics of what's making me shrink or grow, well, it's cheating not for me to give an answer, obviously. So today, I think that I'll say that I would prefer to be very, very short. Because, after all, the world's just not built for someone who is 12 feet tall. If I look at the best case scenario, at least within my mind, then at 12 feet tall, I'll also be twice as broad and twice as thick because I don't really want to be a thinner version of Jack Skellington, and I'm going to have strength proportionate to my size. Those are all benefits. But at twice as broad, I'm going to be just barely narrower than most doorways and have to get on my hands and knees to crawl through them. My torso alone is going to be as long as most doorways. And beyond that, there's just nothing is built for that kind of height. Ceilings are only 8 to 9 feet tall in general. And it just gets worse. All of my furniture, clothing, anything that I buy is going to need to be custom made. We make clothing for people who are 3 feet tall, even people who are big and 3 feet tall. It exists. It's not that big of a deal. So if I don't know how it's going to work exactly, sign me up to be small. But I would love to hear what you guys think. And if you missed it at the beginning, I'm also asking if you would rather be very rich or very successful. Comment down below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the video to grow. And until next time, see ya.